the insurance industry for 40 years, much of it as a claims adjuster dealing with those types of claims. And I'm going to tell you, it's not your larger breeds that's really the problem. Frequency-wise, the biggest problem is with your toy poodles and chihuahuas. They actually have more incidences of breaking the skin. Now, the larger breeds, obviously, the severity factor comes into play. But I'm going to tell you another thing. In my neighborhood, I've got a neighbor who's had nothing but pit bull type dogs. They've been some of the most wonderful neighborhood dogs around. They've become the protectors of the children waiting for the bus right on that same corner. They know everyone in the neighborhood, and I would trust those dogs. I've walked into the yard. They've been fantastic dogs. I've got another neighbor that's got a couple of other smaller dogs. I don't dare walk into the yard. They'll take my leg off. I've got a nice scar from when I was 5 years old riding a bicycle that was actually more of a full-size poodle that took a nice little chunk out of my leg. And I've got scars from my own dogs, stopping fights and things like that. It's not the dogs, it's the owners. Let's get back to some personal responsibility. I think that's where we've got to really come back to is personal responsibility. Let's hold the owners responsible. I think this has gone beyond the scope of the ability of local governments to really look at. If they based it on scientific fact, I'd be a lot more supportive. But I'm going to support this bill. Thank you.
Representative Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a couple of questions?
Representative King, will you yield?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Do we know how many cities require our dogs to be licensed in their cities?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I would guess that the great majority of cities and towns require that.
Okay. Appreciate that. And which kind of brings up my point, if I could. Are we going to then go and then change that law that they can't require the dogs to be licensed in their area? Another question, do we know how many cities tell us how many dogs we can have in our homes?
There are ordinances in various cities and towns that dictate the number of dogs that you can have. I'm not sure that every city and town has that, but I'm sure that's a very common ordinance.
Okay. And with that, just to close, that's why I'm going to vote no on this bill because of that reason. Because I think a year from now, we're probably going to be back up here again and tell the cities that if we have somebody that wants 3 dogs or 4 dogs or 10 dogs, we're going to allow that to happen, or the licensing on that. And then I am afraid that then we as a state will then be collecting the fees, and another organization that we have to have at the state level to have that organization take care of the fees and the licensing of the dogs. So with that, I will be voting no. Thank you.
Representative Webb.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me offer this perspective from the political subdivisions committees. Just today, one of the representatives, and I'll leave his name out, said, "I'm not sure whether we got elected to the city council or got elected to the House of Representatives." What happens is that people don't like something that a city does, and the next line of defense is to run to the legislature to say, we want this overturned. Now, the question is, for everyone here, does this, because we have to do this occasionally, we do have to decide whether cities have overstepped their bounds, so that's our responsibility. The question is, does this rise to that level? For many of us in the committee, it did not, and that's my position. Thank you.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representatives, it isn't often that Representative Green here is consternated, shaken in his chair here with consternation over this bill. So we've reached a good point here. Just a couple more comments maybe from the Political Subdivisions Committee. There was some mention from the good Representative Eagle Mountain that we get frustrated with the federal government coming heavy-handed down on us, dictating what we should do, and maybe we shouldn't turn around and do the same thing to our municipalities. But I do believe the relationship between the federal government and the state is a much different relationship between the state and the political subdivisions. The states did, in fact, create the federal government, and the political subdivisions are political subdivisions of the state. And for me, it's a simple question of property rights. And to the extent I do agree that local control is the best option in all cases, and that we can possibly do. But to the extent the political subdivisions or municipalities are violating property rights, I do think it is the duty of the state to step in and protect personal property rights. We do represent the people, and I do think that they can come to us with those grievances. And with that, I encourage your support for this bill.
Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam, I think I got that right. Thank you. A couple of quick comments. This has been a challenge for me. I'm a strong believer in local support. I appreciate the comments along those lines, and I appreciate the fact that people have pointed out that our relationship to the federal government is not the same as the relationship of cities and towns and counties to the other political subdivisions to the state. My basic reason for supporting this bill is this. As has been heard, when these political subdivisions are out of line, when they do not respect basic property rights, then we have a right, in fact, a duty to act. And the underlying concept underneath all of this, and I think I strive to follow this, I think many of us do, is laws and policies should be based on individual actions and individual merits and not on classes. For that reason, I support this because I think it is that individual communities have overstepped their bounds by setting ordinances based on classes without evidence of individual right or wrongdoing and without respecting the rights of property holders. Thank you.
Representative Polson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I also serve on the Political Subdivisions Committee and struggled somewhat at first with this bill, the balance between local control and individual rights. But in thinking about it with personal experience, I had to reconsider and vote for the bill. I feel like that I've spent a good part of my life raising children and dogs. And in both cases, I can tell you that the same breeding doesn't mean that you're going to get the same outcome. And that is certainly the case with children. It's certainly the case with the dogs that we've encountered. Our most recent one, just for a personal example, was a border collie adopted from best friends down in Kanab that had been abused, and they're notoriously difficult dogs, very smart, but very difficult, and can be as aggressive as a pit bull. But I think in our case, and it has been the case with proper training by a responsible owner, you can make those dogs work for you, and at our house turned that difficult breed into a pussycat. So I think that in this instance that perhaps we should consider maybe overstepping the local control, because this really is an issue of personal freedom, and it seems a little bit irrational to make this kind of statement with breeds. And so I would support the bill.
Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition of this bill. I understand the comments that have been made, but here's the issue. If we don't have a statewide policy for when someone is attacked by a dog or an animal, what happens next? If right now cities are able to determine and have disparate ways of addressing dog attacks, I don't know how we can then, with a heavy hand, tell cities how they're going to regulate what breeds of dogs are in their city. I ran a bill a number of years ago where I thought it was reasonable to dispose of or to deal with animals that attack somebody. A local authority or a local control argument was made, and we don't have a state policy for what happens after someone is attacked. I think that bill would be more germane than the one we're considering here if we were serious about freedoms or what. I mean, there are occasions, and the reason I ran the bill, someone was mauled by a pit bull. That dog got after the person had to go to the hospital. After surgeries, that dog still lived on that street. That dog impacted the quality of life of the family that had been attacked by that dog. There wasn't an ordinance that was addressing that situation. And when I sought to change it, it was a local control argument. My thing is this: if you're going to run a bill like this, then you have to do it the whole way. You have to find out how you're going to mitigate the circumstances when these animals, or any dangerous animal, attacks somebody. We don't touch that. We don't look at it. But we're going to now mandate that they can't make some of these decisions upstream. I think it's well intentioned. I understand why the bill's being run. I don't think it strikes at the issue at hand. And if we're serious as a body about dealing with what is trying to be done in this bill, we would look for smart, consistent ways as a state to deal with the ultimate attacks that do occur within the state. Thank you.
Representative Westwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. In our political subdivisions, we discussed it heavily. There was good conversation. There was good input from the public. There was a lot of good discussion about this, but I agree with our good representative from Salt Lake County that where does this lead? And in the title of the bill, limitation on local government regulation, I worry that we will still be micromanaging this if it's passed again and again. And then where do we break off and say it's a local control issue? I think we do it at this point. Thank you.
Representative Arendt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like others, I have problems telling local governments what to do, but this body does that a lot. Think about what's more important. Billboards, perhaps? We've told local governments what to do there. A few years ago, we told local governments they couldn't have a regulation on idling the way they wanted to do that. We'd have to have 3 warning tickets before we could have any sort of penalty. We do this all the time. So we have to think about what's important and how this will work. So I think about my district. I represent 2 cities in an unincorporated area. So let me take my dog for a walk and see what might happen. And then I think about our experts who are even having a hard time determining what the breed is. What if it's only 25%? What if it's 10%? Where do you draw lines? I urge you to support this bill. Sometimes you have to decide what's important, and you have to say, perhaps in this situation we do need to tell local governments where their authority is. Thank you.
Representative Christofferson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to comment on property rights just a little bit. I have animals on my property. Let's say a city makes an ordinance that you can only have 10 chickens on your property. Well, that's restricting our property rights a little bit. Should we as a state make a rule that anybody in the communities can have as many chickens as they want, or have a horse on their property? And I think the communities form together and form rules according to the desires of what they want. If people aren't satisfied with that, they can go to another zone in the city, or they can go to another city altogether. And I just think that, if we're going to make this kind of rule for the cities on the basis of property rights, then maybe, we ought to start saying, well, we ought to reduce the restrictions and the limits on the number of animals you have, or what kind of animals you have, or how big your property should be before you have animals. I just think this is a local issue, and we ought to let them deal with that. Thank you.
Seeing no further lights, Representative King for summation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the discussion. These are important issues in the sense that we're talking about two, at least, very fundamental rights. The local control issue, are constitutional. It is a constitutional right to own and hold private property and do with it what we want. You've also got a public safety consideration here. I heard the comments from my good friend from Draper, and I want to address that. We do handle things, and we should handle situations in terms of how you handle aggressive dogs on a case-by-case basis when the attack has happened. And we have plenty of tools for cities and towns to do that, and that's right, that they should have those tools. Anti-tethering laws, licensing, vaccination laws, leash laws. But here's the problem that I have with not passing this bill and allowing a patchwork of ordinances from city to city. If I'm walking my dog in a town or a city that doesn't have a breed-specific legislation, and I walk into a town or city that does, I'm breaking the law. That's the interest we have as legislators. When there are compelling reasons that exist to ensure uniformity of law across the state of Utah, that calls on us to act. And that's the common theme for times in the past when we properly, as a legislature, have said we're going to dictate what cities and towns in the state of Utah can and can't do, is when there's an interest in uniformity. And I would suggest to you that there is an interest in uniformity here. It's a private property interest. It's a public safety interest. It's an interest just in terms of letting people know that they're not going to get in trouble when they walk on from one town to another simply because they're walking their dog that happens to be a prohibited breed in another town or another city. So there are a lot of good reasons, I think, for this bill. I appreciate everyone's indulgence and your consideration of this. This has been a good debate. I can see it's, despite people having told me on a number of occasions, King, you got a dog of a bill here. It's not accurate.